purpose, as I say, we'll rank these and we'll start to call the operators to account. We'll start to question them and say to them, why are you performing so badly in this area? And hopefully we can get some learnings about the top performers and get those shared amongst different operators, especially as we transition to the new arrangements for the railway in Britain, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. It's really quite exciting time to be working in the rail industry and looking at these, this very real, rich data from passengers.
Hello and welcome to the latest Talking Transport podcast from London Travel Watch. I'm Alex Smith. I'm Head of Campaigns and Advocacy at London Travel Watch. As London's independent watchdog, we speak up for everyone who uses public transport in and around the city and also people who walk, wheel and cycle in the capital. But what about the areas outside of London? As you may or may not know, we have a sister organisation called Transport Focus, which deals with all the places that we don't reach. And I'm very pleased today that we're going to be speaking to Alex Campbell, who is the Director of Insight and Policy at Transport Focus. It's good to see you, Alex. Thank you for joining us.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for having me.
So, Alex, tell me a bit about yourself and also a bit about Transport Focus for people who may be less familiar with the organisation.
Yeah, so Transport Focus, as you've already hinted at, is the kind of the voice of the transport user outside of London. We have a slightly complicated remit, so we cover rail passengers across the whole of GB outside of London, bus services outside of London in England, and then users on the strategic road network in England. So that's motorways and the major A roads. So quite an interesting remit. We work closely with Scotland and Wales, where our remits don't quite go, but nonetheless, we've got quite a good relationship across the whole of the GB, I should say, not the UK, because Northern Ireland is very much not within our remit. So I joined Transport Focus last year, back in April 2025. I had to remember that now. So as you said, I'm the Director of Policy and Insight. My background is actually more recently in energy. So I spent best part of 15 years working on climate change and decarbonisation. And then before that, around 10, 15 years even in the tech sector, mainly in regulation of tech and also other forms of media and comms.
It's really interesting because it's quite a varied career up until now. So you've been at Transport Focus for about a year, give or take. What do you think's been the most interesting thing that you've learned in that time? Have there been any surprises?
Yeah, one thing that really struck me, coming from an area like climate change, where we know it's critically important to the world, we know it's going to affect individuals everywhere, but it's not quite as emotionally salient, I guess, as transport. And one thing that's really struck me is just how important it is to people's everyday lives. Now, of course, energy is important to people's everyday lives. We don't really think about it. You either get your electricity or you don't. When you don't, it's a big deal, but certainly in Britain, that's very rarely an issue. Transport is a lot more complex, shall we say, in that relationship that people have. If their local bus service is cancelled or changed, that's a big deal. It can change people's lives. Similarly for trains, similarly for the strategic road network, really, really important. And I see that in the way the media covers it, and also in the way politicians and other key stakeholders engage. It's a very different type of relationship, which I guess wasn't so much that I wasn't expecting. Maybe I hadn't thought it through in quite as much detail before I joined.
That's really interesting, and it can definitely relate to kind of seeing the very immediate impact it can have on people in all parts of their lives. So thank you for sharing that. So you've gone into a little bit about what Transport Focus does, and obviously we kind of share a lot of similar interests, even if it might be in geographically different areas. And one of the areas that I think we do a lot of work on, I know Transport Focus also do a lot of work on, and it was also a type of transport that is so important to so many people is buses. We both do buses, but I imagine there's some quite different issues in different areas. I'd be really interested to talk a bit more about your bus journey work that Transport Focus do, and just hear a bit about what that's telling you.
Yeah, so Your Bus Journey is one of our flagship products, if you like, certainly one of our flagship studies. And it asks questions of bus users, sort of as they're doing it or just after. 48,000 journeys, I believe, last year. So lots and lots of real data across the country. I think we had about 80% of England's bus journeys covered in last year, so outside of London, and also Scotland and Wales who chose to take part as well. And it provides some really interesting insight. Most people are satisfied with their bus journey, which is good news. But it does vary a little bit by nation. So Scotland was the most satisfied, a couple of percentage points above Wales. I think Wales was on 84, 85%, and England maybe 1 or 2 percentage points below that. But there's lots of variation driving differences within those nations, to be frank. And so things like the difference between urban and rural areas and semi-rural areas, you have different priorities for people. So, for example, in rural areas, the bigger areas of concern will be not so much around punctuality, perhaps around availability and whether a service is actually running. Because as you can imagine, if there's fewer services running in a rural area, that can really make the difference between getting somewhere or literally not getting somewhere. In urban areas, it's more things about timing and punctuality, which tends to come to the fore, and that's probably related to congestion. So last year, as I said, I think we had about 80% of bus journeys in England, again, outside of London. This year, we're actually anticipating going to all local authority areas, and that's because the government has decided that it actually wants to see the studies across the piece, as it were. So I think it's a great resource for local authorities and for bus service providers. They can see how they compare with other regions, other areas, make like for like comparisons to similar areas. Things like, how important the bus driver is to the experience. In Wales, the Welsh passengers seem to particularly appreciate the bus drivers there, and of course that can make a real difference, especially if you have particular needs. If you're a disabled passenger, or if you need a bit more time to get on because you've got a buggy or shopping and things like that. The attitude of the driver can be really important. So yeah, we find it's really useful. We find the local authorities that are taking part find the data and the information really useful, and we're looking forward to expanding it and moving on in the future.
Definitely. I mean, I can speak for myself. I'm very much looking forward to seeing it as well. It's a real wealth of information there. It sounds really interesting. One of the other sort of big pieces of work that Transport Focus do, and again, something I'm really interested in, is the new Rail Customer Experience Survey. And you've been heavily involved in that. Could you tell me a little bit more about that new survey and what some of the emerging findings are?
Yeah, so the Rail Customer Experience Survey, really massive industry-wide study that so every operator is taking part. We're aiming for 10,000 touch points with passengers essentially a month, or a rail period to be technical. So every 4 weeks, for those who aren't transport geeks. We're actually going past that at the moment. So it is proving really, really successful. It has just started. And by just started, we're a few months in now, launched late in 2025. So it's quite early to start to give definitive findings, but it asks questions like overall satisfaction with the journey, questions around value for money, was the service on time? Then also questions around the station and the train, cleanliness, personal security, which we're seeing as an increasingly important thing. So it's a bit early to start to say, these are the definitive trends, because we just simply haven't done enough reports yet, had enough come through, especially to make the year-on-year trends. As I'm sure you're aware, that there are seasonal differences. During the winter, for example, it seems to be that people's satisfaction drops, quite possibly driven by drops in performance because of weather factors, which I'm sure all familiar with. We can all quote leaves on the line and stories like that. But the purpose of us being involved, so it's an industry-wide initiative, but we produce what we call the scorecards. So we will literally publish a ranking, if you like, of all the different operators, showing where they perform against those different categories that I talked about, so punctuality, value for money, and so on. We also break it down by nation and by region, and then by type of travel purpose. So we have commuter journeys, business travel journeys, and then leisure journeys. Maybe surprising, maybe not. People in the last reporting period commuters were less satisfied than leisure travelers. Still quite high numbers. We're in the mid 80s overall, but low 80s for commuters and up to 90 for leisure travelers. So there is definitely a variation there depending on the purpose of your journey. I mean, it will come as no surprise. The key drivers, was the train on time? Was it cancelled? That directly affects satisfaction as will come as no great surprise. So the purpose, as I say, we'll rank these and we'll start to call the operators to account. We'll start to question them and say to them, why are you performing so badly in this area? And hopefully we can get some learnings about the top performers and get those shared amongst different operators, especially as we transition to the new arrangements for the railway in Britain, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. Yeah, it's really quite exciting time to be working in the rail industry and looking at these, this very real, rich data from passengers. I should probably note one thing that's come up, which I think will be increasingly important. And I say I think at the moment because it's not yet our official position. So I'll just couch that. Personal security seems to be of increasing importance to people, whether that's driven by real changes in threats to personal security, or whether it's reflecting wider social trends. Difficult to say at the moment, and I wouldn't want to make a call on that till we've done some more research. But nonetheless, passengers are feeling that that's more important. So that's going to be a really important thing for the rail industry to start working on and thinking. I mean, I know they are working on it and thinking about it, but really putting more to the forefront. And I think that goes in line with the government's overall thinking around personal security, violence against women and girls, and so on. And so we want to make the transport system obviously as both safe in reality, but also as safe in perception as we possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And it's interesting you pull that out. Personal security is something that London Travel Watch have done a lot of work on. I think there's a old podcast on it as well, if anyone's interested. And it kind of echoing those findings and just how important it is to people making their everyday journeys. And as you say, there is already a lot of work being done in the industry, but I guess just making sure everyone's kind of working together and having a joined up approach, I think is really important. But yeah, be really interested to see where that goes. As you say, there's real wealth of data in there, which that is all published on the Transport.
Yeah, so we publish the scorecards on a quarterly basis, and then we do a big set piece official statistics report every 6 months, and that's when we'll really start to challenge the operators a bit more publicly. We want to give it time to settle down in the early reports, but yeah, we'll expect to be making more and more noise about it in future. But yeah, all available on our website.
Great, I'll definitely be looking forward to that and see when it's published. Finally, looking ahead, there's a lot of change coming this year. It'd be great to hear your take on what's happening and what are the really important things for Transport Focus and the travelling public.
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that's happening to us, and indeed the whole transport ecosystem in Britain, is the government's rail reform agenda. There's a bill going through Parliament at the moment, which is going to fundamentally change things. It's going to see the creation of an entity called GBR, so Great British Railways, which is essentially going to bring together most, not all, but most of the rail operators in Britain under one GBR nationalised entity, and that's going to be obviously a major change going back in a similar way to how things were back in the early 90s and 80s. Very different operating structure, though. So alongside that, which is obviously going to be really important and interesting for passengers, is going to be the creation of a new passenger watchdog. So we are the passenger watchdog at the moment. It's going to be created out of us. So unfortunately, the name at the moment is the new passenger watchdog. So that will change. It's surprisingly difficult to find a decent name, but yeah, watch this space on that. But the new watchdog, I say it's created out of us. So Transport Focus, essentially will be morphed into it, but it will have some interesting new functions. So we're going to be taking on some responsibilities that are currently set with the regulator, the Office of Rail and Road (ORR), and that's in relation to sponsorship of the Rail Ombudsman, who deals with certain types of complaints in the rail sector, but also the setting and monitoring of certain consumer standards. So these are around things like accessibility, passenger information, delay repay, and so on. So it's going to be really exciting for us. We're working closely with ORR to make that happen, and the Rail Ombudsman. We've also got, as a result of the legislation, a new specific duty around promoting accessibility. Now, this relates to the railway, of course, in the context of this legislation, but it reflects, frankly, a much broader push that we've got internally around improving, accessibility in relation to the transport sector. So as we move, through the next year and into the creation of the new watchdog, we will be doing things a little bit differently, but we can showcase some of the work we've already been doing. So late last year, we put out a report on the accessibility of EV chargers on Britain's motorway and major A road networks. So really interesting findings. As I'm sure everyone is aware, EVs are deploying at pace, chargers are popping up everywhere. It's really difficult to find one that's truly accessible, that can be used by someone with particular types of disability. They can be heavy, they can be poorly lit. It can be very difficult to get a wheelchair up to the place to actually disconnect them and plug it into your car. And we put out a pretty strong report saying this wasn't acceptable. The industry really needs to up its game. So we'll be monitoring that closely, alongside looking at accessibility on bus and of course rail as well as we move forward. But yeah, interesting times, exciting times even. So looking forward to it.
Yes, very interesting, as you say, exciting time to be working in transport, I think. Well, thank you very much for your time, Alex. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you very much.
If you'd like to find out more about London Travel Watch's work, please do visit our website, sign up to our newsletter, and keep an eye out for the next podcasts. And where can people find out more about Transport Focus?
So if you want to learn more even about Transport Focus, please go to transportfocus.org.uk and you can sign up for information there and see all the reports that I've been talking about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alex. And for now, thank you for taking the time to watch or listen to this podcast. Goodbye.